The metal edge of the crate bit into his palms, a sharp, familiar pressure. 19-year-old Robert Mitchell stood in the narrow aisle, the hum of the freezer units vibrating through the floorboards beneath his boots. He adjusted his grip, feeling the weight of the canned goods shift as he slid the box onto the shelf. This was his rhythm. He was not a man of high-stakes boardrooms or rapid-fire deals. He was a clerk, defined by the repetitive, necessary labor of stocking shelves. His parents had placed a single conviction into his hands long before he ever stepped into this store. Reliability was the only currency that never devalued. He took that lesson and made it his anchor. Every crate moved with the same deliberate pace. Every aisle cleared with the same focused intent. While others looked for the exit sign or the next shortcut, Robert watched the inventory. He stood in the quiet of the aisle, the store lights buzzing overhead, and saw the world not as a place of grand opportunities, but as a series of small, vital tasks waiting to be finished. He didn't need the spotlight. He needed the work to be done right, and he needed it to be done again tomorrow. Days folded into months, and the grocery store became his classroom. While his peers spent their paychecks on sleek cars and dreamt of quick promotions, Robert arrived 30 minutes before his shift started. He walked the perimeter, checking the inventory, ensuring every product label faced forward. His movements were fluid, devoid of wasted energy. He greeted each shopper with a steady nod, a silent acknowledgement that he was there to assist. When a customer struggled to reach a high shelf, Robert was already there, ladder in hand, long before they could ask. He did not chase the urgency of the floor. He controlled it. His coworkers often leaned against the registers, eyes on the clock, waiting for the freedom of the weekend. Robert simply kept moving. He knew the location of every item by heart, the weight of every box, and the exact sequence on the restocking process. He was the first to arrive and the last to leave the floor in perfect order. Customers began to seek him out, not because he was fast, but because he was always there, always ready, and always consistent. He treated his duties as a craft, finding a quiet satisfaction in the symmetry of a fully stocked aisle. The break room was a cramped space, smelling of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Robert sat at the laminate table, his hands resting on the cover of a worn book he had pulled from a bargain bin. He opened it, his eyes tracking the ink across the page. Napoleon Hill. The author spoke of a truth that felt like a physical weight settling into his chest. Success is the result of consistent habits rather than occasional effort. Robert read the sentence 3 times. He looked at the clock on the wall, then back at the page. The store operated on habits, stocking, cleaning, closing, but he had never viewed his life through that same lens. He had been working hard, but he had not been working to a system. The realization hit him with the force of a sudden shift in gravity. He closed the book, the sound sharp in the quiet room. He stood up, walked back out to the sales floor, and looked at the rows of product. He saw the shelves differently now. Each item was a unit of progress, each task a building block. He stopped looking for shortcuts or temporary gains. He began to map out a trajectory that relied on the slow, inevitable accumulation of daily actions. The store had not changed, but the man inside it had. The next payday, Robert returned to his small apartment. The envelope sat on the table. Before he touched the rent or the grocery money, he pulled out a fixed percentage. He placed the cash into a separate, locked box. It was a silent, unglamorous ritual. He did not buy a new television or upgrade his phone. He did not chase the latest trends that his coworkers raved about in the break room on Monday mornings. They spoke of weekend trips and expensive dinners, their lives punctuated by the constant noise of consumption. Robert listened, nodded, and said nothing. He kept his own life small and contained. The box in his cabinet grew heavier, a physical manifestation of his refusal to spend. He watched his peers struggle when the car repairs or unexpected bills arrived, their budgets stretched thin by the weight of their own choices. Robert felt no urge to join them. He found a strange, quiet power in the discipline of the subtraction. He treated every paycheck like a puzzle he had to solve, ensuring the same portion went into the box every time. While they looked for ways to spend more, he looked for ways to need less. The habit became as mechanical and essential as breathing. Robert turned his focus to the market. He studied the philosophy of Warren Buffett, finding a mirror for his own life in the principles of patience and the power of compounding. He treated his investments exactly as he treated his grocery store duties. There were no shortcuts, only the work. When the market surged, he kept buying. When the headlines turned red and the world panicked, he bought even more. He did not look at the fluctuating screen with fear. He looked at it with the same steady gaze he used to check inventory levels. He saw a discount where others saw a disaster. His coworkers talked about selling, about losses, about the end of their small portfolios. Robert listened, kept his head down, and returned to his station in the aisle. He stacked cans of beans, he moved heavy crates, and he moved money into his accounts with the exact same rhythm. He did not check the prices every hour. He stayed the course. The market shifted, wobbled, and roared. But his hand remained firm on the lever of his own future. He was building a machine, one boring, repetitive decision at a time, indifferent to the noise outside. Years blurred into decades. The store changed, managers came and went, and the faces of the staff cycled through with the seasons. Robert remained a constant, a fixture of the aisles. His coworkers grew older, their faces etched with the lines of mounting debt and the frantic stress of living paycheck to paycheck. They complained about rising interest rates and the crushing weight of their monthly bills in the break room. Robert would sit there, drinking his coffee, listening to their tales of financial ruin. They had no idea that the man stalking the aisle next to them, the one who moved crates with the same steady, rhythmic pace he had used 20 years prior, was building a quiet fortune. He was a ghost in their system. They saw the clerk, but they never saw the investor. He walked past them in the morning, greeted them with a nod, and returned to his work. He never bragged, never spoke of his portfolio, and never showed a hint of the wealth he had accumulated. He let them believe he was just like them, drowning in the same sea of ordinary struggles. Every day, he watched them reach for credit while he reached for compounding. He was invisible. And in that invisibility, he found his greatest strength. One humid afternoon, a young trainee leaned against a metal shelf, his forehead damp with sweat and his hands trembling slightly as he checked his phone. He looked at Robert, who was methodically aligning rows of canned soup, and frowned. The trainee asked why Robert never seemed rattled by the constant, grinding pressure of money. He gestured to the store, to the customers, and to the endless cycle of bills that kept everyone else on edge. Robert paused. He did not turn around immediately. He finished placing the final can in the row, ensuring the label faced perfectly forward. Then, he turned to the younger man and pointed to the neat, uniform stack of cans. He did not speak of complex market formulas or high-yield investments. He simply tapped the metal surface of the shelf. Most people underestimate what 20 years of simple, boring decisions can do, Robert said. The trainee stared at the cans, waiting for a secret, a shortcut, or a piece of insider advice. Robert gave him none. He picked up his scanner, turned back to the inventory list, and continued his work. He had answered the question with the only truth he knew. Consistency is not a performance. It is a quiet, repetitive act that yields results only when the world stops watching. By the time Robert reached his 50s, the nature of his work changed. Not the work inside the store, but the work in the accounts he never mentioned. He looked at his statements during his lunch break. Sitting in the back office, the shift was subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. For decades, the growth of his portfolio relied on his own contributions, a steady drip of capital from his paycheck. Now, the math had inverted. The interest earned on his past decisions began to outpace the money he set aside from his salary. It was a mechanical, cold reality. He watched the numbers climb, not through the brilliance of a market move or the luck of a trade, but through the sheer, stubborn repetition of 4 decades. Every month, the gap widened. The money was doing more work than the man. He stood at the register, watching the same customers, moving the same crates, while a secondary, invisible life surged forward on the page. He felt no surge of triumph, only a quiet confirmation of the process. The engine he had built piece by piece, year by year, was finally self-sustaining. The repetition had become momentum. The boring had become the extraordinary. A few months before his final shift, Robert sat in the cramped office. The air was thick with the scent of floor wax and old paper. He pulled the manila folder from the desk drawer and opened it, his eyes scanning the columns of figures. The numbers were familiar, but the total at the bottom of the final page held a different weight today. He traced the digits with a calloused fingertip, confirming the alignment. The figure had crossed the $1 million mark. He did not lean back or smile. He did not call anyone to share the news. He simply tapped the paper once, squared the edges of the statement, and slid it back into the folder. The click of the metal tab closing echoed in the small room. He stood up, pushed the chair into the desk, and walked out to the sales floor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. He reached the cart corral, grabbed the handle of a metal cart, and began the familiar, rhythmic walk to the back of the store. He moved with the same pace he had maintained since he was 19. His hands gripped the cold metal, his gait steady, his focus entirely on the aisle ahead. The transition was complete, yet the motion remained exactly the same as it had been on his first day. He returned the last cart to the rack, hooked it into the line, and walked to the time clock. He pulled his card, pressed it into the slot, and heard the final mechanical punch of his career. 40 years of consistent daily arrival ended with a single sound. He walked out the front doors into the afternoon sun. He did not look back at the store. He did not wait for a celebration or a farewell from the staff. He had spent his life proving that wealth was not a sprint, but a slow, methodical climb. He walked to his vehicle, placed his keys in the ignition, and drove away. The grocery store continued its cycle without him, but he carried with him the proof of his philosophy. He was not a titan of industry or a master of complex formulas. He was a man who understood that extraordinary results were simply the sum of ordinary, mundane actions performed with unwavering discipline. He had built his life on nothing more than time, patience, and the courage to remain consistent. He turned onto the main road, the store disappearing in his rearview mirror. He had arrived at the destination he had planned decades ago. The work was done. The habit was complete.